Hi guys, Paul from VIEZU and Paramount Performance, and you join us here again in the workshop to feature our next XF video. If you've been watching any of our recent videos, you'll see that we've taken this old girl and we've been doing a little bass work to her, getting her ready for tuning. Well, today the tuning begins, so I'm quite excited about that. In the last video, you will have seen that we fitted 200 cell cats and a sports exhaust system, and today we're going to cover stage 1 tuning. Now, if you know me, you'll know I have little catchphrases, and I say things like, if you're going to tune your car, you've got to make sure the foundations are right, just like building a house. And I say these cheesy little things all the time, but actually there's a lot of sense to this, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. If you book your car in for tuning and the tuner comes out and he plugs straight in and starts trying to load up a map, in my personal opinion, something is going a little bit wrong. When you've got a car like this, particularly as they're a little bit older, you definitely want to run diagnostics before you tune a car. And that's what my sidekick here, Andy, is doing for me right now. And you ideally want to run it on a rolling road to see how the car is actually performing. But diagnostics are really important. And other things like, and again, another little cheesy line, it needs to look right, sound right, and smell right before you start tuning it. And that's quite a mouthful, but what do I mean? Quite literally, does it look right? Is the engine sitting there vibrating away with a misfire? Is it puffing out smoke? Does it sound right? Is the turbocharger or supercharger whistling or rattling? Have we got timing chain noises and other things like this? So if you're going to get your car tuned, or if you are a tuner, let's just slow the whole thing down a little bit, stand back and let's have a good look at this car. It may surprise you to know about 1 in 8 cars that turn up here for tuning we actually are unable to tune, or we're unable to put them on the rolling road because there's an underlying issue. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. You own a car, it feels great, but maybe it doesn't feel quite as quick as it used to, or it feels a bit lackluster these days. I know I'll get it tuned. Well, actually, is there an underlying issue that makes it feel like that rather than it needed tuning? Do we need to actually mechanically start looking at this car? So when a car is presented to us, the first thing we will do is we'll have a good inspection of it. We want to even check things like brakes and tyres. We even check things like stones in the tyres, because if you're running a car on a rolling road like this and it flicks out a stone at nearly 200 miles an hour, they come out like bullets. But we also want to make sure there's no oil leaks, no coolant leaks and various other things. So we'll have a good look at the car and we'll run some quite detailed diagnostics. Now, these Jaguars like to pick up diagnostic codes like you just won't believe. It's not unusual to have quite a lot of codes in there. We want to clear these down, take it on road test and make sure we've not got any permanent faults. And if we have, we possibly want to investigate those before we go on to tuning. So I'll say again, looking to get your car tuned, there are lots of great tuners in the UK, but one of the things you do want to ask them about, are they going to run diagnostics before they tune it? And that's where we're going to start now. So, while Andy is busy running diagnostics for us, before we did this video, I did go out on a couple of our forums, and particularly the Jaguar Mod Squad, which is our own Jaguar forum on Facebook. Please do join us there. And I asked a few of the members if they have any questions. Tuning these modern cars, it can be a bit of an enigma. It sounds a bit like witchcraft sometimes. And people do get a little bit confused, particularly when people start talking about stage 1 tuning and stage 3 tuning and things like that. So we went out and we asked, have you got any questions about tuning? And we had quite a positive response. So before we get too much into this, I just want to cover 3 questions which are quite common in the industry. Question number 1, if tuning is so easy, why don't the manufacturers do it? And this is a real classic question, and we get this a lot. And my answer might surprise you. Manufacturers, of course, do tuning. They do use software to make different brake horsepower on cars, and they do it all the time. Now, I'm of a certain age, and when I was a young lad, the car to have was a Mark II Escort, and that was every young guy's dream. That car came with a 1-litre engine, a 1.1, a 1.3, and if you were rich enough and had deep enough pockets, you might even get the 1.6 Mexico, and of course the holy grail was the RS2000 with a 2-litre Pinto engine. Body shell was the same, but the engine was fundamentally different. Different carburetors, different exhaust systems, different manifolds, and the actual block itself was completely different for each of those engines, each running different brake horsepower. But that's not how cars are built anymore. If you take a Jaguar like this running the 5-litre supercharged engine, This engine was first introduced in the XKR, running 503 brake horsepower. It came out later in a limited edition, running 530. Then along came the XKRS, running 550 brake horsepower. That same 550 brake horsepower version was put in the F-Type when that was launched, and that was quickly upgraded to the SVR, running 575. And then along came the Project 7 and the Project 8, running 600 brake horsepower. And then, to turn all that on its head, along came the P450, a lower brake horsepower version. So let's just be clear, this 5-litre supercharged engine runs everything from 450 brake horsepower to 650 brake horsepower, but predominantly all the mechanical components are the same. So how is this achieved? Through software. Exactly the same type of software that we use to take the P450 to 600 brake horsepower ourselves. So myth number one busted. Is tuning safe and reliable, and do manufacturers do it? Yes, they do it, and absolutely this engine can run 600 brake horsepower, much more, and you're not taking the vehicle away from the manufacturer's specifications, as so many people will tell you on Facebook forums, oh, you can't take the vehicle away from manufacturer's specifications, etc, etc. We're not. Guess what? This engine is completely capable of running this sort of power. Okay, question number 2, which I think came in from a chap called Andy, and his question was, what is the difference between chip tuning and remapping? And I have an ECU here that I hope will help me answer that. In short, they're actually pretty much the same thing. The terminology chip tuning is because originally the chips that held the computer program that runs the engine actually were taken off the board, and you used to take the chip into a chip programmer and take the software off it before you could tune it. From about the year 2000 to 2001, most ECUs moved to this type of ECU, which is actually a microprocessor based ECU. So the chip no longer comes off the board because it's permanently soldered to it, and most of these ECUs can actually be tuned through the diagnostic port of the car, just like this XF can. So no need to remove the chip, in fact no need even to remove the ECU, tuned directly through the OBD port. Once you've got the software off the car, either through the OBD port or off the chip, or in some cases off the board of the ECU directly, the process of tuning them is exactly the same, and that is a process really that's known as remapping. You are changing the profile of the software on the ECU. The name chip tuning was much more about actually taking the chip off the board, and really that's kind of past terminology now, but is still widely used. Okay, and the last question we had was, is tuning safe, and how do we actually make the power to make it safe? And in some ways this relates to the question that we had earlier about, do manufacturers do it? Tuning, how do we make the power? There's two approaches to this, and in many ways the gasoline engine hasn't changed from when it was first concepted. So you make more power by adding more fuel, more air, and changing the spark advance. And for those of you that are old enough to have tuned a car by moving the distributor or playing with the carburetors, or maybe this is something you saw your dad doing, that same approach, upgrading the carburetors or changing the jets in them to add more fuel, adding performance air filters, and then changing the distributor as much as possible to get spark advance just before it pinks, is exactly the same approach that we take and all tuners take to getting new power and bigger power out of new cars running microprocessor based ECU. So the idea of tuning has been around for a very, very long time. But if you remember the first question we had earlier about how do manufacturers tune vehicles, part of the equation we do is actually unlocking power. So the software we're going to take off this vehicle today has lots and lots of limiters. This engine is designed to run much more power than it's currently running, and what the manufacturers do is control it by bringing in limiters to bring in things like boost pressure and torque limiters, and that stops the vehicle developing the power that actually has the potential to do. And by doing that, they can hold it at certain brake horsepower for certain entry-level models or special edition models, but the software is the same, but it is limited in places. So a big part of a modern-day tuner's job is to find those limiters and move them further up the scale to make more power. And this is where a dyno becomes so important. If you are having a tuner that does not have a dyno and is not tied to a company like VIEZU, ourselves, that do the dyno testing for them, I have to ask, how is that vehicle going to be making its power, and how is the tuner going to check that it is? These limiters can be very difficult to find. old-fashioned way of tuning was quite simple. You might change 4 or 5 files within the ECU, and you move up the fuel a bit, you move up the spark advance a bit, and the car makes more power. It's got much more complicated now, and testing the files that are developed is absolutely essential. You can't just crank up the fuel pressure and crank up the turbo pressure like you used to. You've got to be able to find these limiters and test them on a dyno. Dyno testing is really important, and that's the way that we approach tuning here. And we're going to go upstairs in a moment, and we're actually going to see some of these files being developed. Okay, so let's see how the diagnostics are going. Andy, how are we getting on?
Yep, all good, all clear.
Great, okay, so it sounds like the diagnostics are clear. That means we're now confident that we can tune the vehicle, so let's get her rolling on the rolling road and let's see what power she's got. Okay, so the car's just finished its first run of stock runs on the dyno. Let's see how she's running. Andy, what are we actually looking at here?
She's running 520 brake and 539 foot-pound of torque. As you can see on the graph, there is a dip in the torque.
So this is the torque down here. So it starts well, but we seem to be losing some torque.
Yes.
And brake horsepower, nice and strong, and peaks are what is 520? Okay, now this car should have left the factory at about 503 brake horsepower, but if you saw our last video, you'll have seen that we fitted 200 cell performance cats to this car, and that is the difference. This car is now running 520 brake horsepower on its stock software. So I'm quite pleased with that. It shows the cats are working, also shows the car's running really good power. It is lost a little bit of torque, but that's not unusual sometimes as these cars get a bit older. So next we're going to go upstairs with our technical team. We're going to write a new software file. I'm going to take you step by step how we do that. We're going to bring that file back downstairs. Andy's going to test the car again, and we're going to see just how much gains we can get from a stage 1 tuning file. So you join me upstairs now in one of our training rooms, and here at VIEZU we've probably got one of the largest technical teams in the industry. We've got 8 full-time file writers and 2 full-time trainers, and Matt here is one of our trainers, and he's going to go through the map with me now that we've just taken off the XF on the dyno. And you can see perhaps on the screen here, Matt has just loaded up the file, and what I'm looking at is an awful lot of numbers. Matt, what are we actually looking at here?
So Paul, this is the file in its rawest format, the binary format, and this is how the file is written from the manufacturers. So this is in binary, as referred to a bin file from our ECU.
So this is like all ones and zeros. This is like
exactly that.
Something just out of the Matrix.
This is something out of the Matrix.
And now, as they say in the Matrix movie, how do I know what I'm looking at? I mean, is this a pretty girl in a red dress, or is this an Agent Smith character? What do these numbers mean, and how do you read them?
Well, Paul, we've got specialized software that we can use to interpret and understand what these numbers mean, and we'll put them into different formats, such as a 2-dimensional view, which you can see on the screen over here.
Right, okay, that looks like, I'm going to say a lot clearer, but what I'm really seeing is a load of lines and squiggles. What is that?
So Paul, these lines and squiggles are representations of data within the map. Now it's our job as the calibration engineer to go through this map and define the map. So for example...
So you can read these squiggles, you know what these squiggles are?
After years and years of practice, we learn to know what they are.
Wow, okay, that's pretty impressive. So what actually are we looking at? And when we've got this file off the vehicle, what are we going to target? What changes are we going to make? How do you start writing a map for this vehicle?
So Paul, during the changes, we're going to make changes to hundreds of bytes and bits within the ECU.
And let me just understand, that's hundreds of files or data within the ECU? Just how much?
Hundreds of data points within the ECU.
Okay, and you do this by process. Take me through an example if you can.
Well Paul, we'll think about how the engine operates and to go through that process. How we need to get more air into the engine to produce more power and get the fuel to ignite that burn.
Okay, so what maps are we going to start with?
Well, Paul, we're going to start with looking at some of our main maps. So the first map we're going to take a look at over here is our torque request map. So you can see the squiggles now that are on the screen now, and these are actually torque requests in Newton meters. Once they've been defined, And if I open up the table, we'll be able to see that. You can see that this is all in Newton meters because I've fully defined this map.
Okay, I kind of recognise that. So this looks more like something like an Excel spreadsheet, and we've got real numbers in here now. We've not got just ones and zeros or squiggles. We've actually got, these are real Newton meters of torque.
Correct, these are real Newton meters of torque. If I show you here, I can remove the factor, and then you can see what the raw data looks like.
Okay, but if you put the factor, you called it, back on, we've got actual numbers of torque.
Actual values.
Okay, so now I can understand how you could go into this and start changing these numbers to develop more torque.
We first need to know what we are changing before we make any changes.
Okay, so you're going to change this torque request, did you call it?
Yes, this is called a torque request, and based on pedal position, this will decide how much torque the engine should produce.
So you can actually interfere here and say what it used to produce, but we want to give it, how do you adjust, at a percent more?
We'll give it a certain percentage more and cap it at around a certain number in order to give a maximum torque and hold that torque throughout the rev range.
Okay, now you've been discreet here talking about certain numbers, and you've gone a bit mystical with me. That's because you don't want to give away our secret sauce here, isn't it?
Well, Paul, we can't give it all away, can we?
No, I like your style. Okay, great. So this sounds like an important map. What else have we got?
Next, we'll take a look at what's called as the cylinder filling map, or also known as the maximum engine load map. And Paul, as I'm sure you've heard of in the industry, engines run in volumetric efficiency. Now, volumetric efficiency is a percentage of the engine of its theoretical air consumption.
Yep, okay, makes sense.
The most simple way to explain this is, as this is a 5 litre, 5 litres of air would be 100%. Now, obviously, this is a bit more complicated as it's air per cylinder, but that gives you an example of how it works.
So you're trying to run the engine at maximum amount of air, maximum amount of fuel, and you want to increase what it was doing to give it more air and fuel.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
fine.
So a naturally aspirated engine in a perfect world, which doesn't exist as we know, would run 100% volumetric efficiency. Its full amount of air. Now, because this vehicle is supercharged, we can go above 100%. As you can see in this map here, these values are in percentage of air.
Okay, let me just understand, Matt. So what we're saying, we've got a potential 5 litre capacity, but because it's supercharged, you're going to go over 5 litres. So you're putting more air, more than maybe 6 litres, for example, into a 5 litre capacity.
Correct. We're actually compressing the air and forcing it into the combustion chamber.
And how do you make more power by changing this map?
By allowing the supercharger to benefit more air into the engine. The supercharger will allow a certain amount of air, and some of the air will be redirected through the diverter valve.
And it's the ECU that controls that?
Correct.
And you're going to, let me guess, you're going to stop more of that air being diverted and put it into the engine?
Correct.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I can completely follow that. So you're going to make some changes to that map. Are there any more that we're going to be changing?
Paul, there are a lot of maps we're going to be changing. Some of the other maps will include a host of timing maps. I'll show you one just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So over here we have a timing map. Let's get it into a bit of a view that we can actually see what's going on here.
Let me just put my spin on the timing map because I'm an old boy. And one of my first cars, we still had carburetors and we had a distributor. And what I was trying to do in those days is you give it maximum timing by changing the distributor until you just get some pink and then you back it back a little. And that was kind of the maximum timing that you could deliver. I'm guessing you're doing something similar but electronically now?
So everything is electronic now. Paul, we spend a lot of time on the dyno with our Jaguars, as you know, and we'll use what's called knock ears or knock detection equipment to slowly make small changes to this timing map and then see how those changes affect the engine, looking for the maximum brake torque.
So this is work you've done way before we've come to tune our car today. This is from months, years of research in the past. So again, this is really important why you need to choose a tuner with a dyno. So this is where the R&D comes in. You don't want to be going to a tuner that's kind of not seen this file before, and let's say maybe they're working from home or their bedroom even, for example, and they're just going to try and giving it a bit of torque here or a bit of timing there. It's really important the R&D is done up front. So when you choose VIEZU or one of our dealers, they've had the background of this car being on our dyno and people like Matt working on it for days and days, refining these maps so we know exactly what is safe. And that's one of the considerations when you're choosing a tuner. You do want to go to someone that's got a dyno or has access to a master file writer like Matt, who has spent that time on the dyno, put those efforts and hours in getting the files defined first. So how much are we going to be changing here, Matt?
Well, Paul, that's a little bit of a company secret, as that is the maximum value we can get out of these vehicles.
Okay, and that's how we get the power.
Subtle changes to give optimum performance throughout the rev range.
All right, wonderful. And they're what, the 3 main maps, but there are many others?
There are many other maps. There are many versions of these maps I'm showing you. Yeah, we have to make sure we change all of them as to not have any of them holding our power back.
So you've got different maps for different fuel grades, different temperatures, different altitudes?
Different altitudes, different operating conditions throughout.
So you can't just change one timing map. you've got to change lots and lots to make sure that no matter where the vehicle is, however it's being used, those changes are present.
Correct, Paul, and it's important to know which timing maps we're changing, as some of them are used for things such as limp mode, and we don't want to interfere with the safety issues on this vehicle.
All right, very good. Matt, you clearly absolutely know this map very well. You know what you're doing here. One last question. If we wanted to change the speed limiter, for example, this is something you could do?
Yes, we can, Paul. That is present here in the binary file as well, and we can make adjustments to the speed limiter, extending it much further.
Now this is a stage 1 map. If we want to go into stage 2 and stage 3 tuning, we want to start adding supercharger pulleys and things like that. That's something you're going to change this map for?
Correct. We need to account for the additional air that the supercharger is now going to be putting through that engine. So we saw the engine load limiter, that's obviously going to be increased, and changes to the timing maps will also be done in order to accommodate the additional air.
Okay, so that's a really good point that we just covered there, guys, just to cover this off. If you have your vehicle tuned for stage 1 file and then go on to have further modifications, your tuning file is not for life. It does need to be modified and changed for the additional modifications that you're making. But there's an important point here. If you have your vehicle originally tuned with us and you have a stage 1 tune and you go on to modify it with us, so adding supercharger pulleys, for example, or additional cooling, we will change the original map for you free of charge. Now, not many tuning companies do that. We think it's part of the service, part of the package. So if you're looking for a journey of tuning that's going to include further modifications down the road, do ask your tuner, if I add further modifications, will I have to pay again for the map? Because if you don't check that off, you could find that you're paying for the map 2, 3, or even 4 times or more on your journey of enhancing your car. So I think, Matt, you're going to crack on and finish this map for us now. We're going to go downstairs, load it on the car, and well, let's see what good job you've done. VIEZU has around 120 active dealers across the UK. They're a mix of mobile tuners and those with premises, and there's around 1,000 trained installers across 80 different countries around the world, including a strong presence in the USA. Tuning is available mail order, which can be shipped fast, worldwide, and tax-free to most locations too. So it doesn't matter what you're driving, wherever you're based, we still have a tuning solution for you. Okay, so that's the second run finished after the tune file's been uploaded. Andy, what are we looking at now?
Massive improvement. We're looking at 598 brake and
590. We're so close to 600. That's almost there.
and 614 foot-pound of torque.
That is a huge increase. So let's just be clear. We've got this massive peak of torque now that's all new. Yeah. And the brake horsepower starts obviously fairly low down, about the same, but then massively pulls away and delivers a huge increase there, up to nearly 600 brake horsepower on a stock car. Wow, pretty impressive. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. That shows stage 1 map, just how much power and how quickly and easily that power can be unlocked from a 5-litre supercharged Jaguar. Obviously, we're very passionate about what we do here. We test and develop these cars day in, day out, and it's just really nice to be able to share that with you so you can see, you know, the tuning is safe, it is reliable, and how the power can be increased just through plugging in through the OBD port and a bit of new software. If you need any tuning or you've got any questions about how we've done this or where we operate, how you can tune your car wherever you are based in the world, so you can find us at info@viezu.com. Of course, the website is viezu.com, or join us on YouTube or Facebook. You can ask any questions there. We're always keen to hear from you. And our next video is going to be where we fit a smaller upper supercharger pulley to this same car. So we're going to re-look at the tuning after we've fitted a smaller supercharger pulley, and we're going to be pushing the tuning just more and more. And then we've got further videos coming. So if you've got any questions about supercharger upgrades or supercharger pulleys on these Jaguar Land Rover vehicles, drop us an email now and we'll try and make sure that's included in the next video. In the meantime, keep enjoying the drive and stay tuned.